Alright everyone, in this video I will examine the economic model of social democracy. It's sometimes referred to as the Scandinavian model and sometimes also as the Nordic model of economics or governments. The overall question being, can you have your cake and eat it too? In other words, can you have a free market system with a large welfare state without destroying your economy? Because the economic systems in all the 5 Nordic countries are very much similar to each other, it makes the most sense to use the term Nordic model rather than Scandinavian model. There's no real practical use in limiting the term just to the 3 Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden and Denmark. The 5 Nordic countries make up a fair-sized region of Europe, north and east of Britain, north of Germany and Holland, in between Russia and Canada. Greenland is actually part of Denmark, and Norway also includes Svalbard as a protectorate. So the Nordic region actually covers a big chunk of area, land and seas, although the population size of these countries is fairly small. Now, to a person who strongly believes in capitalism and free markets, the Nordic model of social democracy might seem like somewhat of a heresy. After all, a hardcore belief in the capitalist system and free markets can become somewhat religious, and most such people tend to believe that the most important thing in order to have a healthy and strong economy is to have a small government and low taxes. For instance, both an American libertarian and Republican would usually agree with this point of view. The assumption is that if the government becomes too big and costly to maintain, that would undermine the efficiency of the free market economy. It would act as a brake on the economy, slowing down the rate of growth. And providing generous welfare to the people would presumably make them lazy and content to do nothing. It seems logical from that point of view that a system such as social democracy would lead to the eventual decline of the economy and to an overall collapse of the whole system of government. The first misconception some people have that needs to be cleared up about social democracy is that it's a socialist form of government. This is not true. The Nordic countries are all democracies with market-based economies. The state does not do central planning and does not take over ownership of private businesses in a social democracy. So the only difference from a traditional libertarian or capitalist form of government is that the Nordic social democracies have comparatively large welfare states. They also have strong labor unions and a high degree of unionization, meaning most people are part of a labor union. Employers, meaning business owners, have their own unions representing their interests as a counter to the labor unions. The roots of social democracy actually go back to Germany, where the Sozialdemokratische Partei Deutschlands, the SPD, led a reform of the socialist ideology from the early 1900s. At the end of the First World War, the Social Democrats broke with the socialists and communists, forming their own political party that sought to work for social justice within the free market democratic system. Social democracy resulted from a revision of the socialist ideology. So the Social Democrats became a distinct and different form of politics from socialism and communism. One of the main characters in this revision and eventual complete break from socialism was Edward Bernstein. He was a Jewish German man, born 1850, died 1932 in Berlin, who was the first major reformer of socialism towards social democracy, and is counted as one of the founders of social democracy. As time went by, social democracy came to rely on the free market as the basis of the economy, moving more and more away from central planning. The Nordic countries have for a long time had high rates of employment and productivity. Wages are comparatively equalized compared to non-social democratic economies, meaning that the difference in wages within a given industry is smaller between those who make the most and those who make the least. At the same time, the Nordic countries have been able to maintain a generous welfare state and a high minimum wage. For a simple libertarian, this would seem impossible. like an idealistic dream that would never work in practice, much like socialism, which actually doesn't work in practice. But the track record for the social democracies shows it does work in practice. In fact, the Nordic countries have been able to grow at the same rate as the American economy in the period from 1930 to the present. In fact, they have a little higher growth than the US if we look at the numbers. In the same period, all attempts at implementing a socialist form of government, in all cases where it has been tried, have failed miserably and resulted in oppressive dictatorship regimes where the economies have been, by and large, disastrous. Social democracies, on the other hand, have worked out very well and seem a viable form of compromise between hardcore capitalism and some kind of socialism. I should not really say socialism, more like a form of caring and solidaric type of government which is not Marxist, socialist or communist. So social but not socialist. Social democracy. So the Nordic countries have a high employment to population ratio. That goes for both young and older workers, men and women. Both high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers have a high degree of employment in the Nordic countries. These social democracies face international competition and are still able to compete despite their large welfare states. The Nordic countries are also quick to embrace new technologies as they become available, so the libertarian or classic capitalist prejudice that a large welfare state will no doubt strangle the economy is proven wrong by the very existence of the Nordic social democracies. Of course, the Nordic countries are not the only countries in the world that have social democratic political parties. Social democratic parties can be found all over the world. As mentioned, it all began in Germany, and they still have social democratic parties there, and their overall system of government have many similarities with the Nordic countries. The same can be said about Holland. So, many developed countries have a welfare state just like the Nordic countries do. This map gives the general idea of the distribution of welfare states in the world. But the Nordic countries perform very well on most indices consistently. What is the secret? What makes them so successful? As previously mentioned, the organization of labor unions and employers' unions has something to do with it. An article in the Journal of Public Economics from 2014 called The Scandinavian Model, an Interpretation by Karl Ove Moene, professor of economics at the University of Oslo, Erling Barth and Fredrik Wilhelmsen, we find some good answers to why the Nordic model works so well. This article focuses on the Scandinavian countries, but similar explanations may be found for Finland and Iceland too. I quote, "The wage for a particular job is determined by the centrally negotiated tariff wage plus a constrained wage drift linked to the productivity of the firm. Wage setting is highly centralized, but after the centrally negotiated tariffs are negotiated, the local negotiations begin. And for the local negotiations, the focus is on increased wages only to the degree that the workers can show increased productivity. Encompassing organizations in the labor market follow a policy of wage coordination and wage compression, with a strong emphasis for full employment in central bargaining and microeconomic efficiency in local bargaining. Wage compression leads to a higher rate of creative destruction and further wage compression with an increasing average wage. Creative destruction is a process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. Basically increased efficiency and modernization. More wage equality and higher average wages fuel the political support for welfare spending. There might even be a feedback from public welfare policies to productivity rise and further wage compression. This complementarity explains why the same outcomes, efficiency and a high level of equality, could not have been achieved by redistribution through the political system alone. This political economic equilibrium path has benefited from consistent policies that have supplemented market forces. Active labor market programs and moderations on employment protection have been important policies to facilitate structural change and reallocation of labor without excessive wage differentials. While Sweden innovated active labor market policies, Denmark has become famous for its flexicurity systems, which combines low employment protection with generous social insurance, with an explicit aim at facilitating structural change. The other Scandinavian countries have medium levels of employment protection, and, in particular, an employer may downsize or shut down plants based on considerations of profitability and economic outlook without significant severance pay. A similar concern for consistency is evident from the extensive use of workfare policies, which are used in Denmark, Norway and Sweden to ensure that work pays in the presence of generous welfare benefits. High employment reduces the cost of a generous benefits system and increases the tax base. Active job search or qualifications efforts are, for example, required in order to obtain unemployment benefits. In sum, the complementarity between the non-market institutions and capitalists in central policy element of the Scandinavian model has been a combination of active labor market programs aimed at upgrading the skills of unemployed workers with only moderate employment protection legislation. Investments help explain why the main institutions and policies have survived for over 80 years. The gains are spread widely across groups. There are many winners and few losers. Both low-paid groups and employers are clear winners, as wage compression and rising profits are two sides of the same coin. High-skilled workers are potential losers, but also high-skilled workers may gain from wage moderation as the average productivity goes up. The stability of the Scandinavian model can in part be explained by the good performance, and the good performance must have been helped by the stability of the model. The key is that both depends on the egalitarian aspects of the Scandinavian model that share the gains of good performance on almost all groups. Since the interactions between wage coordination, investments, and welfare spending all strengthen the egalitarian aspects of the model, it would not be possible to achieve the same egalitarian results by redistribution through the welfare state only. The article is also publicly available at the University of Oslo's web pages, link provided below. Karl Ove Moene has also come up with some other very interesting results. In another article, he looked at the prevalence of rich people, defined as people with a fortune of at least $30 million, and super rich people, defined as people with a fortune of $100 million or more. His report looked at how many of these we find per 1 million inhabitants in different countries. The results showed that the USA has 124.6 rich people and 36.5 super rich people per 1 million inhabitants, and that Norway had 472.8 rich people and 63.6 super rich people per 1 million inhabitants. The conclusion being that it's easier to get rich in social democratic Norway than in the USA. In closing, I guess this means you may indeed have your cake and eat it too.